Today's modern working professionals expect a learning experience that reflects the world we live in. Canvas LMS is built to help organizations unlock the potential of skills-based learning by focusing on what matters to learners and their educators. From dynamic course delivery to adaptable credentialing, Canvas empowers learners to thrive in a rapidly evolving landscape. See what it's all about at canvas.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer Podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Ryan Lufkin. Ryan is the Vice President of Global Academic Strategy at Canvas by Instructure. And hello, Ryan.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to explore what skill-based learning means and what AI's role is. But first, let's chat about you. How did you land in your current role, which you said is your dream job? That is awesome. Anything accidental in your journey, let us know.
I've been in education technology for over 25 years, and most of that was on the marketing, product marketing side, sales enablement, marketing enablement as well. And about 2 years ago, we had some change in product leadership, and I had been kind of filling a gap for our executive team. And I was the junior executive who was out on the road talking to our customers and talking to the media and things like that. And I said, you know what, we're gonna formalize that role and move you out of product marketing, instead of heading product marketing, we're going to put you in this strategy role and see how that works. And I've spent then the last 2 years, really jumping on planes and flying all over the globe, talking to universities, presenting at universities, really getting their feedback and then bringing that back to the company. And I love it. It's honestly, before we went on air, we were talking a little bit about it, but it's so amazing to see, the campus environment in Latin America and the different types of schools in Latin America versus Australia or the Philippines. And, just being able to visit those campuses and see how the learning is working and the consistencies in education across the board, but then the differences is just fascinating.
Any favorite trips that you've had recently? This is just making me hungry. I think it's because it's like lunchtime right now.
My Latin American team loves to feed me. And so I actually, when I was in Santiago, Chile last week, and I think I came back about 10 pounds heavier because the food is delicious and they make sure we meet and we work and we present and then we find a good restaurant. So.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, let's chat a little bit about skills-based learning, about AI, and we'll level set because skill-based, I think, of course, can mean a lot of things.
Yeah.
You and I talked about how at first I was thinking about the skills-powered organization. That's very fuzzy, but maybe we're just narrowing our focus a little bit. So what does skill-based learning mean to you?
So what I think is interesting is fundamentally, we've always hired people for the skills they have, right? The challenge is that it's not always easy to identify what those skills are, right? When we interview folks. On the higher education side, what's sometimes challenging is a lot of university professors and institutions feel like skills-based learning or skills-based anything has more to do with being a vocational school, right? We're not a vocational school. We don't teach skills. But you do, right? And so I spent a lot of time having conversations saying, look, whether you like it or not, you're a skills-based organization. What you're not doing is quantifying those skills into the subparts. You're looking at courses and programs and adding titles to those things, but you're not breaking down into the component skills that make that person capable for the job. And that's what makes it harder for hiring organizations to map those people with those skills directly into the jobs they need, those skills they need. And so realistically, the fundamental change isn't a change in the type of education. It's how do we measure individual skills within the framework of an individual course or program and just quantify that. Make sure that we're able to communicate that the student is able to communicate that as they're looking for jobs. And that we're building trust with employers that if I hire that student that claims that they have that skill, they actually have that skill, right? And can be immediately effective at work.
We've talked about this a little bit before on the podcast, and Bob Mosier last year, I'm fascinated because it makes me think of the skills taxonomies and you're doing the skills analysis. And this just seems like a no-brainer where AI could really help expedite that process because in the middle of creating your master Excel document
Yeah.
that has a bazillion tabs and rows and columns and all of the things,
Yeah.
like by the time you finish with that, it could be no longer relevant. It's just
Well, and the problem with the skills taxonomies that are out there is they're generally a little bit out of date, right? It's really difficult for those kind of unified skills taxonomies to be agreed upon by folks and then continue to evolve rapidly as we have, as AI prompting and large language model management and these new skills come out, they're not necessarily rapidly added to that list, right? And those things. And so, I think one of the challenges, again, if I look at my higher education time, a lot of the idea is that if we break these down into the component skills, somehow the soft skills, and making figure quotes, the soft skills of communication, empathy, working in groups, right? Those are somehow lost. And I don't think they are. And actually, one of the things that AI is really good at is if you run your course description and your rubrics and your course content through and say, hey, give me a list of all of the skills. If I was going to break this down into the component skills, it's really good at that, right? It's actually really good at. There's some blind spots I think we tend to have, and it's really good at breaking those out. Again, with the oversight of the educator to say, yeah, you're right. This is, or sometimes it'll throw it in there. You're like, no, that's not at all what I. That's part of it, right? And as long as we have that human in the loop, it's really good at breaking that down and really mapping that for us.
okay. So this is going to be my next question to make really explicit for everyone. What will AI's role be in facilitating skills-based learning? I think it's probably going to be a mix of all sorts of things, an accelerator, a
Yeah.
disruptor, a tool, something we should make sure to be careful not to over rely on, as you're
Yeah.
already mentioning, like the human part. But I can't wait to hear more about your perspective.
I am an optimist when it comes to AI. I'm a huge advocate for AI literacy and helping educators understand that. But I'm also very transparent on the fact that I do not think that AI will ever replace educators. The connection between teacher and student is what really drives the educational experience, right? We carry around supercomputers in our pocket that have access to all the world's data. We still have to have guides, and we still need people to understand the skills that we have and the knowledge we have, and then help fill those gaps. And so for AI, what I think is going to be really interesting is the idea that we can personalize those experience. We can really focus on skills within, the when we talk about programs like competency-based education or those, we talk a lot about, credit for prior learning. But AI is really good at assessing what what skills you have, and saying, hey, let's focus on these areas. Let's fill those gaps. It's also really good at filling the gaps in the style of learning, right? There's some great tools like Notebook LM that you can pull all of your course material into, and it'll actually give it to you as a podcast. And you can listen to the podcast, you can hit pause and ask questions, right? It's just that ability to choose the type of content or the format that you want to deliver the content in, receive the content in, how you want to learn is really powerful. And I think when we talk about accessibility and neurodivergent learners and things like that, we're all at some level neurodivergent. We are not the same when it comes to how we consume information and learn. And so AI is great about supporting educators by helping make those connections in very personalized ways.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the topic of accessibility. Another passionate topic of mine. We
Yeah.
have hosted Bello Miguel Cipriani on the podcast before, and one of the biggest things that I've learned from him for accessibility is to give people options.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
it can be very resource intensive,
Yeah.
time consuming, expensive to
Yep.
create so many options. And even the reason why someone might need a different option, walked me through the example of that even sometimes like using a PDF can be more resource
I mean,
intensive and
it really
more
is. Yeah.
mentally taxing for someone with a disability than opening up a Word document and moving through a Word document with your screen reader, or even
Yeah,
just
the
where you
PDFs
are
are
with your
designed not
internet.
to work well with screen readers, right? They're designed specifically to preserve that content. And so as you've got a screen reader and they don't have alt text, they're broken. And so we actually within Canvas, we always say do not use PDFs wherever possible, because from an accessibility standpoint, it really breaks the machine.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So all of a sudden having an AI tool in the mix, as you mentioned before, that should help determine what format or modality that you're presenting the information in. But also being able to have options for people depending on where they are or
Yeah.
what all sorts of just if then circumstances
Yeah.
is
So how do you create that flexibility and that ability to personalize without putting that workload on the educator, right?
yeah.
That's what's really important. And AI does that really well. AI actually provides put in all your course material, build your course as you would otherwise, and let AI, you know, interpret that material for the individual students. That's something it does very well. Now, the educator has to monitor that and make
I
sure
was
that
gonna
we
say
don't,
this is
you
the
know,
first draft.
yes, I mean, because what's even when we talk about things like AI assisted grading, right? People get really antsy about you're using AI to, you know, to grade my work, and I'm paying, you know, university prices for you to have a tool grade my work for me. But what's interesting is when you actually see first pass grading, it's fascinating because it's more consistent, right? There's a reason that we have within our grade book, you can what's the word I'm looking for? You can randomize grading, right? So that you're not grading A first, because there's a thing called grading fatigue where they're really, you know, educators are really thorough on the first A, you know, in the A list from A to L, right?
Yes.
Later on, they become less thorough. And it's just that grading fatigue. And so within Canvas, you can randomize that. So you're doing it all, but first pass grading doesn't get fatigued. It measures everybody against the exact same rubric, at the exact same level. So it actually provides a level of fairness to grading in that first pass that you don't get otherwise. What you have to have then is also the ability for educators to check that grading and modify that grading and make sure that it's accurate. But from a time saving standpoint, from a fairness standpoint, from a speed, you know, students want immediate feedback. My own daughter, who's going to be a junior at the University of Utah this year, she'll say, you know, I submitted my paper 2 days ago and I still haven't gotten feedback on it yet. She wants real-time feedback. That's not possible in larger classes unless we start leveraging some of these tools. And so it's that balance. How do we make sure we're using them most effectively for time saving to meet student expectations, but not relying on them too much so that they're getting the wrong answers and wandering off task a little bit.
That's a cool example because in my kind of my prep questions, I was thinking, oh, let's talk about how AI might be changing how we deliver skills development. And that's right away a cool example because you need feedback. You need that
Yep.
personalized, customized feedback to master those skills. And it changes the game in terms of how many folks you could be providing feedback to. If you've had to slow the way that you offer a leadership development program or some type of offering in your organization purely off of bandwidth
Yeah.
and knowing we can't give this customized feedback to everyone. And so you have to limit the
Yeah.
scope, the class size.
Yeah, the educator is creating the course content. The educator is creating the rubric for measuring the you know the assignments and the output. So it does all the educator's work. It's just automating that first pass process, right? And it's amazing how much time that can save in an organization when you're like, and again, meet those expectations. Everybody wants more real-time feedback, right? Everybody wants, you know, we've become kind of a culture of, you know, immediate satisfaction. And so how do we support that? How do we do that? And again, like we talked about, it's not replacing an educator, it's scaling them to support more individuals or move more quickly.
Yeah. So okay. Now I'm starting to create some buckets for myself. So we're talking a little bit about accessibility, feedback. There's this administrative
Yep.
component, just the sheer operational, the nuts and bolts where the rubber meets the road
Yeah.
of how you actually are able to deliver skill development in your organization. But now, because we talked about feedback, it makes me want to chat about practice opportunities, the actual learning the lesson in the first place, and reflection, some of those
Yeah.
other kind of big picture buckets that help lead to true skill development. So let's talk about practice opportunities first. What are all the options available right now because of AI?
There's honestly so many. And again, when we talk about the personalized experience, you know, you can basically say, hey, create a set of flashcards. Take this content and create a set of flashcards that I can learn that way. I don't learn with flashcards. My wife loves flashcards, right? So I can personalize that experience. there's so many different ways to customize the experience. But what's interesting is I think we're still at the phase where we're lacking a little bit of curiosity in what these tools are capable of, because we at least in the higher ed space and certainly in the K-12 space, we're still very hung up on the fact that these tools are being used to cheat. Again, finger quotes, cheat. And what people aren't accepting is the fact that these tools moving forward are going to be part of the learning experience, right? And so if you look at the launch of the calculator, people are like, it's the death of critical thinking. And then you saw the internet and it's a distraction and it makes us less productive and than Wikipedia. It's not peer reviewed, so it's not reliable, right? All of these things were a hurdle to get over. AI in very much the same way is a hurdle to get over. And so I was in Rhode Island earlier this year and I was talking to a professor and he said, I'm a good writer. I don't need to use AI because I'm a good writer. And I said, well, then don't use it to write. Use it to summarize your emails, use it to do research for you, use it to summarize large reading assignments. And he was like, oh, but he was so kind of hung up on the fact that these were cheating tools that it was holding him back from exploring how these could be used in specific ways. And there's great tools like Claude's learning mode, right? Claude's large language model by Anthropic that you can actually put in learning mode. And instead of giving you the direct answer to a question, it'll ask you additional questions to help guide you to that answer. Very Socratic method, right? And when you understand that AI can be leveraged that way, so it's not just going to give you the answer, but help as like a teaching assistant to guide you through that process and fill gaps where maybe I took a course, a leadership course. Maybe I'm going through that, but there's some gaps, and my trainer doesn't necessarily have time to engage with me and give me the detail. But I can actually go to a tool like AI, where like Anthropic's learning mode, Claude, and ask it questions, and it'll actually fill in those gaps for me in the exact same way my trainer would, as an extension of my trainer, as opposed to just giving me the answer and moving on. That's really powerful. I think that's important. We got to shift that mindset a little bit to start exploring those different use cases, because we're honestly just scratching the surface.
Yeah, for sure. Yesterday, at our second day of our ATD intensive, we were focusing a little bit on the learning experience, and it was so cool to see the examples that some of our speakers were presenting.
Yeah.
They were AI-powered role play scenarios. You can interact with a very realistic avatar. You're having a real-time conversation, building a mobile chatbot, and Carl Kopp, it gave me so many ideas, and it was so funny to see him modeling. He's scrolling through all of the different chatbots that he's created, and he sampled a little bit of a Dungeons and Dragons one that he made. That was like, I could see any professor actually putting in some of the material that they're learning about into one of these GPTs, or maybe that would be an assignment that you could do.
We see that a lot. It's like
Yes.
turning it on its head and actually having students how would you use AI to support this assignment? How would you use AI? And it's almost like that flipped classroom experience, because writing a 20-page paper is no longer the best way to measure skill mastery. We've got to flip that on its head, and that, I think, is the biggest challenge too in education. Is we still want to do multiple choice quizzes and 10-page papers, and there's a tool called Goth AI that is an app on your phone that you can take a picture of your screen and it'll give you all the answers to your quizzes, regardless of what software you're using, right? And people are like, how do we stop plugins? I'm like, you can't. You can't stop plugins. You can't stop the use of these tools. And when teachers say, oh, we're going to go medieval, we're going to go back to pen and paper, that's not setting up, people well for the future and how they're going to use these tools.
For sure. One thing that I am noticing and seeing over and over again is it's a combination of overwhelm and feeling strapped for resources.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a tough year, and folks are getting really crafty and really limited in being able to pay for new resources and tools. What are ways to start off with AI and playing around with supporting your skills development if you don't have a really nice, cushy budget to work with?
Yeah. I mean, there's actually some great training course. Like Google has a AI Essentials course that is, depending on the day, either free or $49, right? Which is a great intro to basically how a large language model works. How do you make sure you're writing your prompts to get the best output? Things like that from some really smart folks at Google. IBM has a huge set of free courses that are available out there, right? Most of the university, ChatGPT actually has OpenAI has a set of free materials to go out and figure out how do I teach with AI? How do I prompt write? Doing those basics, and a lot of them will give you a badge to put on your LinkedIn that says, "Hey, I've done this," right? And that's really important. Those just kind of get you over that initial, not understanding of how it works, because we see new announcements every day, right? These are being trained now on trillions of models, and now we're starting to talk about agentic AI and what does that mean? And it can feel like you've missed the boat and throw up your hands. In reality, it's really easy. Go out to OpenAI, go out to Claude, go out to any of the free tools and just play with them. You start writing a prompt. Think about something that, you know, takes too much time that you want to save a little time on. The one of the challenges right now for a lot of educators in the higher ed space is they used to assign 20 pages of reading, right? And say, okay, go do the 20-page reading. Students aren't reading that anymore. They're going and summarizing with AI and saying, hey, give me the pertinent points of that 20, right? So that pain of reading that used to be the learning is not painful anymore. And so there's this kind of weird debate happening right now. Like, is the pain the learning, or can we have the learning without the pain? And I think that's across the educational space, the psychology of learning is in discussion again, because how do we, with these time-saving tools, how do we use them in a way that is encouraging learning and building on learning, but it's not circumventing learning?
Yeah, I mean, speaking my language, I immediately start thinking of desirable difficulties, all that research with
Yep.
Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork. There's definitely a level of discomfort that is required in learning. And
Yeah.
that's what I think one of the nice things about this ATD community and L&D professionals is because they have that learning background, hopefully,
Yeah.
as they're maybe creating learning experiences for folks in their organization, that they are protective of what true skill development
Yeah.
requires, and knowing that we'll have to intentionally create opportunities for folks to get in practice time. We talked about this with Matt Bean on the podcast last year, that hospitals that are using these AI robots are suddenly replacing junior doctors, and then
Yeah.
you're not getting in the same type of repetition and same type of observation hours that they historically would have done pre-AI
Yeah.
robots on the scene, and that it's led to deviant behavior for folks who know that they need to go out of their way and maybe out of what
Yeah.
is technically allowed in their environments to make sure that they're getting in that practice time. But I think the great thing is that maybe L&D professionals know that even if AI is on the scene and we're partnering and collaborating and it's changing some things, that if the skill is not just a performative task that they can do like with a job aid, and they truly need to be able to do it and think critically, and
Yeah.
oh, then you're going to have to do some of the things that you're already doing right now, still working without AI.
No, that's kind of a bit. I mean, it's funny. I walked past a robot in the grocery store that was an inventory robot that was going down the aisles and taking inventory. And that, I worked at a grocery store in high school, and that was a job that we did, was go and count the number of boxes of macaroni and cheese on the shelf and make sure they were all faced, right? Now you've got a robot doing a portion of that job. And that, it really is a big conversation across education is, the jobs that we used to do as entry level jobs are now being kind of, many of them are being automated by or being done by fewer people by AI, right? My first job out of college, I was working for an ad agency, and I was writing bumpers, radio bumpers for Coca-Cola, and 20-second radio bumpers. AI could write those, in its sleep, right? And so that entry level job, my first bridge into a career, is not really there anymore, right? And so I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. We talk a lot about the skills gap and making sure that that students have the right skills for the well-paying jobs. But we need to also make sure that those jobs that used to be the entry point jobs are still there and are not all being automated. Because yeah, I think to your point, like how do we make sure that people are developing the skills necessary? And without those entry level jobs, how do you skip over? How do you go from A to D and skip over B and C without, and still make sure when you get to D, you've got the skills necessary to move forward? And that's a debate going on right now that I don't know that we have the answer for.
Yeah. Or that it's going to be one of those it depends type of responses. It's going to depend on the industry and the role. I see just a lot of different stats going around about, yes, AI is displacing roles, but not necessarily replacing roles,
Yeah.
or that new jobs are being created, but they're different because AI has come in and done this other task. And maybe that's a good thing because there wasn't necessarily a lot of mobility opportunity with this job that AI is come in and taken
Yeah.
over. And so maybe you have the potential for a new career mobility pathway, which then still just leads me back to AI. That I think I saw this was happening at Salesforce, where if you have some type of internal talent workplace and you're able to kind of define what your skills are and see the skills that are possible throughout the organization, you could be led to a role that you may never have considered for
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and maybe we're jumping over those mundane jobs that aren't necessarily building the skills we need for long-term success anyway, right? I was at San Jose State University a couple of weeks ago, and there was a panel of professors that are using AI in their classroom, and one of them had a great story. He runs a course on product development, and he said, we used to spend the first 60% of the course designing a product, coming up with the specifications for that product, doing images of that product, doing all those things. Now with AI, we can do that in 10% of the time. So now that we to the first 10% of the course is that I've got to fill the rest of this course. So what we started doing is leaning into the more human skills. So now, we used to spend the last 10% of the course reaching out to individuals in industry to get their feedback on the product design and build mentorship kind of programs. Now we spend the last 50% of the course doing that. And then instead of reaching out to one, they have to reach out to three and they have to set meetings with them. And so, I know my daughter does not like to pick up the phone and call anyone, right? That's horrific to her. She'll text anybody. But the idea that these students are now being pushed into these more human skills that frankly we may not have been doing such a great job with in the recent past in teaching, I think is really valuable. When you start looking at that, let AI do the mundane things. Let's focus on the human tasks. That's really important. Like I don't know. It gives me hope that we're actually building better humans on the shoulders of AI instead of feeling like everyone's going to be replaced by AI in the future.
I know we could keep digging about human skills and talking about, oh, how do you measure judgment and
Exactly. Yeah.
developing those things? Like we could go down the rabbit hole of now maybe we're using AI and AI can help us to,
Eventually, I'll measure that, right? Yeah.
yeah, to do like the
Yeah.
skills analysis like, in the first place for those hard to develop,
I think
hard to
that cause
measure.
of and solution to all of our problems.
Yeah. But I really, that I love to talk about criticisms. So let's jump into, oh, I don't want to paint just this rosy picture that AI solves all the problems, because I know that our listeners don't believe that. I don't believe that either. And I think that folks can feel weary that there's suppliers, vendors that are making big AI promises. I saw this even at the exhibition floor at our big international conference in May, where like people are trying to count how many vendors, how many folks are saying that they're using AI. Maybe all of them are to different extents, but there's automated skills taxonomies. Maybe they're promising personalized learning. How many people are saying that they're doing personalized learning, but
Yeah.
what they're actually offering could be different? Where do you think the hype outpaces reality right now?
across the board. There's an online school that's actually saying, look, we're fully AI powered AI school, and we're teaching students with AI, and we're opening in 5 more states, right? I'll give you an example. I had a manager at Instructure, right, my own company, who sent me a doc and said, "Hey, this is a list of all the top 50 AI tools being used by universities, and how they're branding it and everything. You should use this." And I was like, "Okay, interesting, right?" I pulled it up and I looked at the first line. It was University of Michigan, Maisie, one I'm really familiar with. And I looked at the second line and I'm like, "That's not Notre Dame's tool." And I went to the third line. I'm like, "No, that's not University of Maryland's tool, right?" And what he had done is populated that first line and then had AI populate the rest. And he took for granted that AI had been accurate in what it gave him, and it looked great. It looked, if you at a first pass, it looked great. Every single line, 49 of the 50, all the ones that were filled up by AI were hallucinated, right? They were not real, and included URLs and everything. The URLs didn't work, but they were there, right? And it's that kind of thing that we've got to be very cautious of. If we're not critical of the outputs of AI, it's very easy to think that they're capable of more than they are. And so I think, like with a lot of the promises that talk about AI, anything where AI is being rolled out autonomously without a human in the loop, without checks and balances at every phase, I think that's everyone should be skeptical. The other aspect too is we're already seeing the first round of startups that got a lot of funding for these tools run out of money. I got a call from a couple of weeks ago. I got a call from a startup that I'd been in touch with earlier saying, "Hey, do you want to buy our URL? Do you want to buy our IP? Do you want to buy our beta list?" And I said, "Do your beta customers know that you're selling their list?" Right? So there's a little bit of we need to make sure beyond the basics of what large language model are they using, what data are they consuming, are we protecting our user data privacy, right? What does that look like? There's also a what is their track record? What do their future funding look like? Let's make sure that we're not working with partners who are going to sell our data once they've collected it, right? That's, I think, a big piece. And then the other aspect is we're in this evolutionary mode, right? We've moved beyond the basic chatbots. We're in the specialized large language model mode, but we're moving towards the agentic mode where these agents, an AI agent works across different systems on an individual's behalf to accomplish tasks in a much more automated way. And how do we make sure that we are looking at the future of how these tools are going to be rolled out instead of just today, right? Even we see other people in our space rolling out a lot of point solutions, and we're saying that's great for today, but down the road, how does that support the mission of our organizations? And so I think there's still a lot of skepticism. I like that you're like, don't just look at the rosy side. How do we make sure that we're being cognizant of the challenges?
I like you talked about the human oversight piece and gave a great example on an individual scale whenever you're using the tool yourself, but then it led into sort of the vendor conversations that you can have. And you listed a bunch of different types of questions that you can be talking about. And that human oversight piece can be brought back into the conversation of how have they built in safety and guardrails to protect
Absolutely.
privacy and to minimize the risk of hallucinations? How can you even trust the outputs? How much do you have to redo? I have a really funny story of an attendee yesterday who she was giving an example of her process back and forth with one of her AI tools, and it had spit out all this information. And she asked, "Where did you get these sources from?" And it responded, "I made them up based off of the conversations that we've had in the past."
I had a good friend of mine, he said I asked it to summarize a very large document and give me the outputs, and it came up with, and I was like, "That is not a summary of this document. Are you summarizing this document?" And it said, "No, I just pulled the information that I thought you might want." He's like, "Well, I asked you very specifically to summarize this document." It was like, that took longer than this would have. He's like, "Well, I want you to do the thing I asked you to do," right? So that's really interesting. Even the tools that are trained on databases have a tendency to drift, right, from their answers. We see that frequently. And so we're still early in this phase of putting too much trust in these large language models completely. We can't ignore them. We can't pretend that they're not here. We can't pretend they're not the future, but we definitely have to be skeptical, and we definitely have to provide that oversight and the framework to control access.
Oh, I like that you brought up trust. And that's my motto these days is don't trust and verify.
Trust but verify. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
I'm like, don't trust and always verify.
Don't trust and then verify.
Yeah. So, okay, we've talked a little bit about this, but anything else that AI can't do well yet, or at least not yet when it comes to skill development or measurement?
I mean, I still think so often, most of the AI detection tools really rely on measuring the mediocrity of the writing, right? These are still not tools that are providing creative writing at the level of a human, right? Like, and they're not that creative spark is still with us, right? And so I think there's things we can do to map skills, but we have a tendency to anthropomorphize these. So even as we talk about measuring those human skills, we still need human input to measure those human skills, right? Because what may pass muster with an AI tool may not pass muster with an actual human measuring the same thing. And so we've got to make sure there's two different approaches: that human in the loop, so human approving every output, and then there's in the future we're going to see more human on the loop as these tools get more ubiquitous. But we're in that trust building phase right now where we need to make sure that they're doing their job right, so that in the future they're doing it more effectively.
Okay, cool. I have so many more questions. I'm going to jump. Do you think there's a common misconception or tightly held belief that may be holding some organizations back from enabling AI powered skills based strategy in their work?
I think it's very easy for leaders in some cases to read articles about AI and make some assumptions or jump to conclusions. And I think without the experience of them jumping in and using the tools, they don't necessarily really truly understand what they're capable of, right? And what they're not good at, right? And I think it's really important that we roll out organizational wide AI literacy programs to make sure that we have common understandings about how these tools work. We still see a lot of employers saying, "Hey, I want AI skills in my employees." And we're like, "Well, what AI skills?" AI skills. Right? Like not even a definition. Are you talking about prompt literacy? Are you talking about basic AI literacy? Are you talking about large language model and database management, right? Like what you've got to understand that spectrum. It's not just AI, right? Still think in most organizations there's a lack of complexity in how we think about AI. And certainly we don't want leaders who are maybe not as well versed making assumptions about what they're capable of and shifting jobs or shifting responsibilities from people that the AI tools just aren't ready to do those things unsupervised.
That's interesting. I like that you mentioned the AI literacy piece. I've been following sort of that thread and find it fascinating how subjective that term even is
Yeah.
and what it might mean from person to person, organization to organization, and having a more robust framework that breaks down sort of sub competencies
Yeah.
and includes practicum and experimentation and application seems to be what more strategic organizations
Yeah.
are doing in terms of upskilling their workforce and AI capabilities.
I still think it's kind of alarming how many organizations don't have clear AI usage policies and well communicated policies, right? People want the guidance on when they should use these tools, how they should use these tools, even which tools to use based off of what the organizations want. I think we can't over communicate that right now. We're seeing a proliferation of these tools being used. And you got to remember there's at least one large language model consuming information behind all of these tools. How are we protecting intellectual property and copyrightable material and things like that? We've got to make sure that we're, as organizations, taking the lead in how we apply these tools and make sure people are using them consciously. And again, if you don't know what it's capable of, everybody knows the story of the Samsung employee who early on took a chunk of code and dropped it into the public facing version of ChatGPT to check out the code. Well, that's now public domain, right? That's not protectable anymore. And so I don't think that person probably works for Samsung anymore, but it was a valuable lesson that when what you put into the public facing models now becomes consumed within those models and is not protectable.
So let's try to look into the future. What could a high performing AI enabled skills first L&D team look like 2 years from now?
I think it's focusing on identifying using AI tools, right, to identify what our employees are doing well, but what they could be doing better, and then filling those gaps with just-in-time training, micro learning experience that is designed for them, that fits into their daily tasks, right? A lot of times those trainings are considered cumbersome because I've got to find time that I do those. If they happen in 10-minute increments, when I know when the AI tool knows I've got a break for lunch, say, hey, before you go back to work after lunch, do this really fast, right? It has the ability to deliver that in the future. And I think we'll see as we build that trust, like we were talking about, as we build that trust, these tools are going to disappear into the background and just provide a lot of ease of interaction. And I think understanding what good could look like that, really helps us lean into how do we get there. So that personalized learning, just in time learning, and breaking down the monotony. But again, these tools can also be much more engaging. They can actually create great imagery, great videos, great interactive experiences that are sometimes too time consuming for us to do at scale across our organizations.
I was chatting with Trish Ewell, who honestly scared me by showing the trajectory of where AI is headed and
Yeah.
knowing that in just a few years that AI will be able to take over entire organizations' workloads. So not just a person's, just the power of some of the AI and agentic systems that will come out. So when I'm trying to look into the future, something you said, it did make me think that we'll never close a quote unquote skills gap. There will
Yeah.
always be new skills that are in high demand, but hopefully having AI plus human collaboration helps to be agile and flexible and you said just in time learning, be able to deliver on what those needs are in real time as quickly as possible. And that will only become a bigger necessity in our more complex
Yeah.
world.
And then human skills, the communication, the right. I really do think there, when you look at the kind of modernized versions of Bloom taxonomies that take into account AI, we really do see there's a whole set of human skills that AI is not going to accomplish. It's going to do the more mundane things that we've taken for granted, and it will eliminate some of those jobs, right? There's a lot of mundane. I'm not even going to call out individual industries, but there's a lot of mundane tasks that it will ultimately replace. So how do we make sure we as humans build the skills that keep us valuable and keep us on the top of that pyramid, I guess.
Well, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you, Ryan. Before we close out for today, I would love to shift gears, focus back on you for a moment to find out what are you doing to get out of your comfort zone? How are you currently learning and growing?
I'm a huge believer in lifelong learning. So earlier this year, the Google Essentials AI Essentials course, I took that course to see how they were talking about it. It's on my LinkedIn, right? I did a AI ethics and regulation course with Oxford, say, at business school to make sure, I was understanding how the EU AI Act is driving regulation globally, right? And things of that. And I'll just continue to kind of do those micro learning opportunities, not micro learning really, because they're more of a certificate program, but they're ways, those non-degree programs that we can just kind of drip feed throughout our career to make sure that we're keeping pace with what's out there. There's so many opportunities. I think that's what's I think is so fascinating is no matter what you want to do, what you want to learn, someone is offering a credential program, a bundle of courses that you can, in most cases, for relatively cheap, go out and learn. And so I can't advocate for that enough. That and I watch barbecue shows to make sure that I am also improving my barbecue experience at the same time. That's my personal side.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to chat with you today.
It was great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to our sponsor, Canvas by Instructure.